Great. Thank you, Wei Tai, and greetings, everyone. This is Matt Bogosian. Thanks for being on our Bay Area Climate Reality Project call for policy action. I head up our policy action leadership team, and this is an experiment here where we're trying to match up, two important worlds that I've been lucky enough to be a small part of. The first is the environmental law and policy world. As folks know, my background is in environmental and sustainability policy work at the California EPA, at the US EPA. So from that world, I'm lucky enough to know and be connected to some of the nation's top law and climate policy experts. And so we have some of them on this call with us. John Dernbach from Widener Law School and Mike Gerrard from Columbia Law School, who put together the legal pathways for deep decarbonization in the United States. It's a publication that also has an online tool run by another top policy attorney, Jordan Gerow from the Pace Energy and Climate Center. He is also on the call. Mike and then John and then Mike again are going to talk. They're going to give us a brief intro of their work. And then Jordan is going to give us a tour of the online tool. Then the second world that we're trying to match up this expert work with is our climate activist work, right? All the work that we do with the Climate Reality Project. As I said in my notes setting up this call, we're looking to see if our policy action squads can start to use this tool to bring better and better policy petitions to local governing bodies, so we can get demand that they adopt more aggressive GHG reducing policies by a date certain. So we thought, let's get this group together. We'll introduce the tool. We'll experiment. For our squad leaders, thank you all for being on the call. I understand we also have invited some folks from Los Angeles, Oregon, and Washington, so those folks might be on the call too. And just so you all know, in the Climate Reality Project, Wei Tai Kwok and I had an earlier call with John, Mike, and Jordan. So they have a pretty good idea about what we're trying to do around policy action here in the Bay Area chapter. And what we're trying to do is improve on how this works so that we can put this together and share it with chapters around the world, so we can get volunteers bringing the best policy petitions to their governing bodies. So that's kind of the theory of the case, and we're testing it here with you all. So really appreciate you being on here. We also, I'm not sure if he is on. Oh, I'm sorry. Wei Tai and I are also going to do a little role play. It's going to be an ad lib thing where we stumble around with the tool, and then Jordan tries to help us figure it out. So that could be fun. It could create, or I don't know how that's going to go. But most of the time on this call will be around. Following that will be Q&A. So that'll be good. We also might have on the call Ken Alex, who's the director of the project Climate at UC Berkeley Law School. He is Jerry Brown's right-hand advisor on climate for 8 years. Ken and I have talked about the possibility of getting volunteer law students to help our squads take some of these model policies and curate them for whichever local governing bodies our squads target. So we're looking at, at that as a possibility too. So that's what we're doing. And so delighted that you're all here. Thanks for engaging as we go. And let me turn it over to Mike Gerrard from Columbia Law School. Mike?
Thanks very much, Matt. It's a pleasure to be with you all virtually. About 7 years ago, a group based in New York called the Sustainable Development Solutions Network and a group based in Paris called IDRI put together a project called Deep Decarbonization Pathways. And its purpose was to come up with scenarios for the 15 largest greenhouse gas emitting countries of how they could reduce their greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050. So they put together a book for each country. One of the books was for the US. And the US book and subsequent evolutions of it have had 4 basic pillars. The first is decarbonizing electricity so that we're no longer using fossil fuels to make electricity. The second is energy efficiency, making energy use as efficient as possible. The third is electrification of those uses that currently directly use fossil fuels, led by transport, so that basically all passenger vehicles would have to be electric. And building heating and cooling would also have to be electric. And now more recently, they've added the fourth pathway, which is carbon dioxide removal. We have to take a lot of the carbon dioxide that is now in the atmosphere out of it. The scenarios for the US all assumed continued population growth, continued economic growth, continued highly reliable electricity service, and all the other services that we rely on. So John Dernbach and I then asked the question, how does US law need to change in order for the US to be on one of these pathways? They had various variations of the pathways. One of them relied heavily on nuclear, one relied heavily on carbon sequestration, one mostly on renewables. Looks like the one that's mostly relying on renewables is the one we're most likely to follow. But we decided to ask the question of how federal, state, and local law need to change to be on those pathways. And now I'll turn it over to John, who will describe what we did in the book that we produced.
So we reached out, what we did is we divided the project into about 35 parts, and each corresponding to a separate chapter. And I'll describe briefly the categories that the chapters fell into. The number 35 is important here to give you some idea of the detail and depth that we went into. And we reached out to academic and practicing lawyers from around the country, about 60 of them in all, to write particular chapters. And we asked each of the chapter authors or author teams to do three things. One was to describe the contribution that this particular topic makes to US greenhouse gas emissions. The second thing was to explain the relevant existing law on that. And the third thing was to make recommendations for how this particular topic could contribute to a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of at least 80% by 2050. I'm well aware that a lot of folks are talking about zero and net zero at the moment. But in 2014 and 2015, when these reports were written, 80% reduction looked like the way to go. And frankly, it doesn't make much difference to our project whether you pick 80% as a target or you pick net negative as a target. The tools work in either case. And then over the course of several years, we edited these particular chapters. And the book was published. Michael was showing it before. I'll show it again. The book was published in the spring of 2012. It's an 1,100-page book. It has 1,500. Pardon?
2019.
Did I say not 15?
You said 12, but anyway.
12, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was published about a year ago last spring. And it has about 1,500 recommendations. And as Michael indicated, they apply to the federal government, state and local governments, but also to the private sector. And one thing that's worth saying now about those recommendations is you're probably thinking as activists, well, holy smokes, I don't have time to read a big book. And what I will tell you is I get that, and we got that. And so what we did is we created an index of recommendations by actor. So if you're interested in working at the local government level, you can find in the back of the book every single recommendation that applies to local governments in one place, organized by chapter. So it's pretty easy to find things. We're well aware that not everybody is going to take out 3 months of their life or whatever it is part-time to read something like that. The other thing I should say is that we published a summary and key recommendations version of the book as well. You can find this online for free as a PDF. If you just Google legal pathways to deep decarbonization in the United States, summary and key recommendations, you ought to be able to find it. And if you can't, we'll give Matt a link at some point, and he'll be able to do that. A couple of basic things that we found. One was that the tools are actually available. There's a kind of a sense, I'm sure you've seen from people, that holy smokes, this is a bad problem. What are we going to do? Is this a problem that's even fixable? And one of the things that we saw and the legal recommendations make quite clear is we have it within our power to do this. This problem is a problem that lends itself very well to the use of law. And so that's I think an important finding. The second thing we found is that a great many of the tools are going to create social, environmental, and other economic benefits, technological development, job creation, all the rest. I think a lot of you are familiar with those arguments. And a third thing we saw was that the tools don't all fall into one category. It's easy to say, well, you know, this is 1,500 ways you can regulate the private sector. And that's really not how the way the tools work out at all. Regulation is important to be very sure. Market-based tools are important to be very sure. A lot of us think some kind of carbon price is necessary and appropriate. But there's a lot of other legal tools out there, building climate change into infrastructure, for example, research and development, for example, insurance law, for example, changing the way you operate, the law that applies to your facilities and operations is another example. And of course, social equity is an important piece of this. Those are all part of the 12 different tools, different types of tools that we found in this book. Briefly on the chapters, there are chapters on energy efficiency, conservation, and fuel switching. Some of them, but there's a number of chapters that apply to buildings. There are separate chapters for new and existing buildings, just to give you an example. And there are buildings for pretty much chapters for pretty much every single kind of transportation you can think of. Planes, rail, light-duty vehicles, and heavy-duty vehicles. We have a set of chapters on electricity decarbonization. Michael wrote the one on utility scale renewables. There are chapters on rooftop renewables. There are chapters on nuclear and hydropower and phasing out fossil fuels in the electricity sector. The use of nuclear is there because we are operating in the premise that you need to put every tool in front of people and not decide in advance what tools are appropriate or not, and let the people who read the book and who use or don't use particular tools to make those decisions. We have chapters on liquid fuel decarbonization. The big message here is use it very carefully, use it for stuff like planes, and make sure that you don't, that you produce it in a sustainable way. We have chapters on carbon capture and negative emissions, carbon capture and sequestration, direct air capture, agriculture and forestry. And finally, we have chapters on non-carbon dioxide pollutants, black carbon, methane, fluorinated compounds, and nitrous oxide. And I said finally a second ago, but I didn't really mean it. We also have a set of chapters on cross-cutting recommendations. And by that, I mean carbon pricing, behavior, technological innovation, 2 chapters on financing, a chapter on materials consumption and solid waste, and a chapter on trade. And I give you those just to give you a sense of the detail and depth of the project. One of the things that we heard at a conference that Michael and I were both at earlier this year, and this is the last point I'll make, from somebody who's active in the Federalist Society nationally, is he found the book compelling in many ways. And what he found is that there were way more options available than most of the people in his community had even imagined. And so I think that's one of the contributions that the book makes.
So we didn't want
John. Mike?
We didn't want the book just to sit on the shelf. We wanted it to turn into actual laws. And so we've started a project to recruit pro bono law firms and individual lawyers to draft the model laws that are recommended by the book. There are more than 1,000 laws that are recommended, some federal, some state, some local. So a fellow named Rick Horsch, who just retired as a partner at a big law firm in New York, White & Case, volunteered to take on the task of coordinating this effort to recruit and supervise pro bono law firms. And Marcy Kahn, who had just retired as a justice of the New York State Supreme Court Appellate Division, volunteered to take on the job of running the peer review process. So we now have about 25 big law firms that are drafting laws. We're looking for more. We're looking also for individual lawyers to draft these laws. We also have a team of peer reviewers who are reviewing each of the laws that is drafted to make sure that it is of high quality. So that is an ongoing project. We wanted to make all this readily accessible to the world. And we also recognized that not only were we drafting model laws, but there were a whole lot of other people who had drafted model laws and a lot of actual laws that were out there. And so in order to put that together, we brought in Jordan Gerow, who put together this terrific website that has an enormous wealth of material. And I'm now going to turn it over to Jordan, who can show you the website and how it works.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. I'm going to try sharing my screen and let me know if that works for you. Everybody see
Yes.
it? Excellent.
Looks good, Jordan. Yeah.
Perfect. So lpdd.org is a website that basically tracks the hierarchy of the LPDD text that John just described for you, the 35 chapters and all the subpathways that fall under them. The resources we collect, again, are laws, model laws, resources sometimes like policy papers that might be on the cusp of becoming a model law around the corner. And of course, finally, as Michael mentioned, the LPDD model laws that we are collecting with our team of pro bono lawyers. So I'm going to survey this website for you and show you a couple different ways to navigate and show you a sample of some of the things we have here. There's two ways that you can work your way through this. One is sort of through the tree diagram under pathways. You see 8, these are more like families of pathways, and you might find underneath each of them a set of pathways that correspond to the 35 chapters. Just so you know, we have a large section here at the top for context. This includes other resources that survey deep decarbonization at a level that's similar to the level we do. So for example, when the Obama administration in 2016 put out their United States mid-century strategy for deep decarbonization, we like to collect those, although that's at a certain high level. So if you're looking for high level background of how we accomplish the whole task, that's a great place to start. John went over cross-cutting approaches to reducing emissions. Those include carbon pricing, behavior, technological innovation. You can see the theme here. These are approaches that will apply to many different sectors of society. So we've organized them at the start. And then the book and the website walk through individual sectors, buildings and industry, transportation, electricity, fuel decarbonization, carbon capture, and then finally non-carbon dioxide pollutants at the end. I wish we had time to walk you through each of these because there's a lot of jewels in this resource, but I'm going to take a little time just to walk you through one or two and show you how to navigate. So let's say you were interested in electric vehicles and wanted to learn more about charging infrastructure. Under the transportation tab, we have light duty vehicles here. That corresponds to chapter 14 in the book. Every time you go to a pathway that corresponds to a chapter, it begins with a description of everything that's under that pathway. That can just get you familiarized. And then under each of these sub-pathways that you find beneath here, here's the EV charging infrastructure sub-pathway. Associated with each of these, we'll show you a list, not all of the recommendations in the LPDD text, but a sampling of some of the relevant recommendations that the authors of the LPDD text made. So this should get you oriented with the types of action that we're trying to capture good examples from. So below that, you will find, and Michael mentioned this, we have a team of pro bono lawyers who are drafting these model laws. We always sort these to the top because we have the highest confidence in them. These are LPDD model laws that apply directly to this subtopic. So I'll click through to one of them and you can see what they look like. We should have a brief description letting you know. And I chose this one particularly, streetlight poles, because if you're an activist at the local level, you might be looking for stuff that's super accessible. And when this came in, I was startled to learn that there is, in fact, a technology and a company that will convert street lights in your town for about $110 US into electric charging stations. The law firm that brought us this then wrote up a model law that surveyed the technology, that gave us a sense of what the appropriate goal might be for a municipal level charging program like this. And you can see it's short, it's digestible. There's an introduction that explains its role in the larger decarbonization context, the purpose and intent, and it concludes with standards. And it's pretty direct. It's something that I think that people can get their arms around. So that's just an example on the EV charging side. If you were to go through, let's say you were to go further through this EV charging sub-pathway, you'd find a number of pieces of state legislation. Let's go to the next page. You'd find a number of pieces of local legislation. So here we have, I know there's a number of folks from the Bay Area. Here we have San Francisco's EV Ready Ordinance from 2017. And we have a direct link to that ordinance and a short summary. So let's say that was all well and good. You wanted to know how you could search for something like this more directly through the search function. I'm going to show that to you. Our search function is built so that you can filter by pathways, jurisdictions, locations, and keywords. So if you were to be using this tool and trying to figure out how you can search by pathway, again, every sub-pathway is listed here. That's 265 at this point. I don't recommend you scroll it, but you might start typing and see if we have something that comes up. And this is going to be keyed directly to the word you type. It's not kind of associated by word family or anything. So if you type charger, you don't get anything. If you type charging, you immediately see, there it is, expanding EV charging infrastructure. And we have another sub-pathway about rate design for EV chargers. So let's select for that. There's 35 resources in the tool for that. We filtered by jurisdiction. Again, let's try to pull up the San Francisco example again. So let's look at local governments. Local governments is another 13 of that 35. So you see the numbers go down there. And by location, now that we're only looking at 13 resources, there's not so many in most states. So let's select for California. There it is. And I show you how to do that, A, so you understand how you can use the search function to be able to search particularly for local laws, but also if you happen to know of something that, a specific example of a piece of legislation that you'd like to know more about, we might have it and you might be able to find it and then click through to the family that we've sorted it under and learn about other similar laws like San Francisco's EV Ready charging program. So that, well, that actually takes me through everything I wanted to show you at a high level on the tool. I'll point out while we're here, all of our contact information is up on this tab, including all of the folks who are helping us organize the model law project. And every time we post new model laws, they are going to get highlighted here on the What's New tab. So that should give you a pretty good sense of how to use the tool. I could show you more examples, but I think it might be more worthwhile for us to do a little role play.
Okay, thanks, Jordan. We've gotten the rundown from Mike and John and a quick tour by Jordan. So we were thinking, well, you know, let's try something, you know, from the perspective of a squad here in the Climate Reality Project Bay Area chapter. We have now 1,000 members, and there's a lot of folks that, want to make a meaningful difference on policy action, but they're not sure, what area to focus on, or, how to get to the best policy prescription, to demand a local governing body. And so, what happens often, as I put in my note, for this meeting, is we just, share what's the latest thing or whatever. So we thought Wei Tai and I could just put ourselves in the shoes of newbies, and then Jordan could help us figure out. So I'm a new Climate Reality Project member, and Wei Tai, we're on the same squad. Wei Tai, it's great to be on the squad. Boy, I'm going to make a difference.
Yeah.
What are we going to do?
Hey, Matt, tell me what to do. I'm all for changing some local policies here.
Yeah. Well, I wish you were a lawyer, because then you could tell me what we're supposed to do.
Sorry.
Well, I heard about that, that we have this tool that all these policy experts around the country and locally have put together. And our chapter is telling us that we should focus on building electrification, as a policy area of focus. So, how do we get started with this thing, Wei Tai, to try to use this tool to grab a policy? All we need is one policy, right, that we're going to pitch to a local governing body, but we want it to count if we're going to pitch it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when we think about what is the local governing body we're talking about, Matt, do you think we should go after a city, or do you think we should go after, like, I live in Contra Costa County, should we go at the county level? What do you?
Well, yeah, let's go. Well, it's wherever we're going to get the biggest bang, wherever we think we're going to make a difference. So, like, if there's board of supervisors, let's go after your county. I mean, I live very close to Contra Costa County, so that could work out. Now, you have 5 members of the board of supervisors, is that right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So we need 3 votes, right, to get a more aggressive building electrification policy. Is that right?
That's right. So where should we start? Where should we start then if we go after Contra Costa County and ask them, and we want them to take higher ambition on electrifying buildings and maybe banning natural gas from new construction?
Well, if we're going to do all this effort, I certainly want to be advocating for the best policy that's out there, that's doable, and so we need some help. So where are we going to go? Let's try this tool that we heard about from that policy action leadership team. They're talking about this tool. Let's go on there, and maybe this guy that called in, Jordan, could help us navigate this tool. Jordan, are you on the line? Can you jump in here and help us out? We're struggling a little bit.
I am. Sounds like you're off to a great start. You've identified what you want to go after and who you want to go after. So in the realm of building electrification, I would point you back down our pathways. And should I share screen again? Would that be maybe helpful?
That would be great, Jordan. Thanks, because I need it by Braille, my friend. Yeah.
Let's do that. Okay, so I might point you back down pathways, and you'll see the 3rd family of pathways here are about buildings and industry. We have a chapter on new buildings and existing buildings to work through. I would point you, there's a short list of things I would point you to, maybe a longer list. Let me start with the short list. Within the new buildings chapter, I would point you towards zero net energy buildings, natural gas bans for new buildings. You might find some pretty helpful things for you in improving state and local building energy codes and clean building incentive programs, but I'd start at the highest level with zero net energy and natural gas bans. And we can walk through each of those in detail if you like, but let me just show you what we also have in existing buildings. I'd also tell you might want to check out fuel switching, which, if you're not familiar with the terminology, is sometimes used interchangeably with electrification. And one of the hot new areas, one of the areas that only a few jurisdictions around the country have started to broach, all pretty recently, are building energy performance standards, which actually for the first time go after the existing building stock and make them meet a rising standard over time. So does any of that wet your whistle?
Yeah, I think that it's sort of really cool because we're only just interested in the general theme of building electrification and had not really been able to determine whether new buildings or old buildings are better. But I think by being able to go dig down into both areas, we can learn new words and phrases and themes, like if we're, in this case, you're in the existing building area, that we could, potentially petition for higher building energy performance standards as a way of getting to our goal.
Is there any way to figure out, which is the highest priority thing to choose? I mean, because we can only do one, probably. I don't know. I don't have that much time. I'm a volunteer.
We don't have like a ranking hierarchy of what the hottest topic is that you could go after, what the highest ambition project you could go after, unless it came from one of our LPDD model laws, which again, I think are our proudest work product. So we don't have those yet in the building energy performance standards space. But if I were to advise you personally, I would tell you building energy performance standard is one of the best areas to go after. There's only 4 of them in the country, maybe 5 if you count Boulder, which had one going back to 2010, but wasn't quite as ambitious as the recent ones. And of the 4, most of them are at the local level. So you have some good examples out of St. Louis and New York that are leading the country right now.
Well, can we take a look at one of those, Jordan, to see, like, if I have 3 minutes in front of the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors, I mean, we're going to try to talk to some of those 3 members of the Board of Supervisors beforehand, but at some point, I'm told as a volunteer, I'm going to be making some kind of a pitch to the Board of Supervisors. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how to, talk at the super high levels. I just need a script, really. Does this give me some detail here that I could talk off of?
So we don't work our way down to an activist script per se, but I think that if you have a little bit of time to look at it, you'll find there's a good bit of detail here. We try to give a relatively readable summary of what each of these actions are and why they're important for you in the listing itself. And then we give you actually the full legislation that you can use as a model.
Can you, I guess, download that PDF or just see sort of as an example, what are we going to see when we open that?
Right. This is the Building Energy Performance Standard out of St. Louis. It's the full bill with their own, this St. Louis put together is their own summary of it at the start.
Yeah, so that's a 4-point, talking point. I like it too, Wade. I could do that one. Yeah.
Well, I like how recent it is, just from February of this year. That's amazing that you're able to, that we're able to tap into something that's, really fresh.
Yeah, like I said, building energy performance standards are a really recent area in the law. And in fact, I'd even point, if you have time for me to rattle your ear off a little, I'd even point you towards New York City's for another good example. Only one of these in the country used greenhouse gas emissions intensity as the metric by which buildings would be judged. So you could have a really efficient building that energy efficient but runs on natural gas, and that might do better under St. Louis's standard, for example, than New York's. So I think you, and we also have, let me make sure to point this out. We also house reports like ECEEE here has written a report on mandating building energy performance standards. I maybe should have led with this actually. This introduces you to the concepts, introduces you to some talking points for how it's being adopted in different jurisdictions. And if you're just trying to get your feet wet and understand what this area of law is, we try to list these kinds of papers as well.
Well, that is great, Jordan. Thanks for helping us through the tool. I think Wei Tai and I are on our way to being able to petition the Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors. Thanks.
Thanks, Jordan.
All right,
Yeah,
so
I think
that ends our little role play. Go ahead, Wikai. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to just say thank you for all of you who are joining in on the chat here and the positive, productive feedback and the enthusiasm for this. I hope that Jordan, he probably couldn't multitask and read the chats at the same time, but there's a lot of applause for you on what you've done here, John, Jordan, Mike, and the work. I think a very appreciative audience here. Why don't we, Matt, do you want to just take some questions here from the group?
Yeah, I think that would be great. We have a good chunk of time, so let's hear from folks that have been listening.
All right, it looks like Linda Deschambeau has raised her hand. Linda, why don't you go ahead? And anybody else who wants to speak next, just raise your hand. Thank you.
Hi there, everybody. This is fabulous. I don't know if I heard, when did you start this?
We started work on the project, I guess, around 2015, and our hope was that we would be able to give it in January 2017 to an incoming Hillary Clinton administration. But
so I am in Contra Costa County, and we do a lot of policy, and I'm actually a former elected official in a small town, and I'm just curious. I'm eager to, after this call, go through your website. It looks just fantastic. But a couple of questions were, is there a way to search for dates? For instance, I picked in the chat the example of, petroleum-based styrofoam bans we've been following since like 2007 versus if a city passes one now in 2020, it might look very different, especially because in California we have different laws and plastics. And then also, how do you find them, and stay current? Because, I was just looking at our styrofoam ban page, and we feature 64 cities. We have links to 64 cities on our site. Sorry, my Contra Costa Climate Leaders is the name of my nonprofit, where we track local policies. But I bet it's way bigger than that. And I'm just curious, how are you ranking them by date, and how are you able to stay on top of it? Because there's a lot of good stuff going on. And I just echo Deborah's earlier comments, some help on, I know ICLEI does stuff on helping you prioritize. Should I work on a styrofoam ban, or should I work on banning natural gas in buildings? So it's kind of a long-winded blah, blah, but also some questions rolled in there. But thank you. I'm excited.
Jordan, you want to take that?
I could weigh in. So there is not as yet functionality for sorting by the date that the laws were issued, but if we didn't stress this enough in the presentation before, this is a young and evolving tool. I would love to take that back as a really useful piece of advice and see if we can build that in the future. And again, folks who have any kind of experience working with this tool in the future, we would love your feedback on how we can improve it. As far as how we find things, the book was a tremendous foundation. Outside research-wise, 5,000 climate newsletters and just doing our damnedest, I guess.
I'd love to even talk with you offline and share some of our resources. You might find them helpful and vice versa. So I'm glad to have this webinar today and learn about you.
Yeah, my contact is right on the contact tab. If you click on it, you can find me there, and I'm happy to hear from folks. And that sounds great.
Sorry, what's the contact tab? I haven't seen that in Zoom before.
I'm sorry, I'm referring to on the website. If you're on the website.
Oh, okay. Sorry, on the website.
Yeah. Okay,
maybe you could share it for us in the chat would be helpful.
Sure.
I'd love to hear more and time to play with this.
Thanks, Linda. You bring up a great point. One of the purposes of this session is actually to give our team a preview of this very, very new resources. This is just launched, and Matt, wanted to bring this to our attention, and we thought we should share this not just with the Bay Area chapter, but all the West Coast chapters of Climate Reality. But it's two ways. Like, it's such a new resource that I know that John, Jordan, and Mike would like to get feedback from us as early users, and what on any items, right? That was part of this session too. That give you guys some feedback, right? So any other next question? Who else had a question there or a comment? I saw Leslie nodding her head there, so I'm going to call on Leslie Alden and ask you to give a comment or feedback. being a long
I
time.
didn't realize I was nodding my head. It's more in gratitude. I actually am familiar with the website, and I was really excited that Matt put this together. This is, I'm glad, to spread the word, because this is an extraordinary tool. I think the only issue that any of us who are not in the legal profession or researchers is the extraordinary amount of information that's there. And so this is a website design thought, that you just make the introduction to it as feel good and easy and seductive as possible, so people go, yeah, I can do this. Because once you get into it, I mean, it's like rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole, which I personally love. But it's not something that I think that's a challenge. It was a challenge for me too, I mean, to be honest, because there's just so much there. So from a design standpoint, that would be my only suggestion. But I am extraordinarily grateful that all of you have worked on this for 5 or more years. And this is a gift. It's a gift to all of us who are working on this. So thank you very, very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Leslie.
Thank you for that feedback.
Karen Nelson, I put something in the chat. Do you want to ask it in real time live and have us talk about it?
Yeah, I worked on Reach Code adoption in San Jose and a few other communities, but mostly San Jose. And so I realized, and by the way, let me start and say, this is an incredible amassing of information that is truly phenomenal. So my question doesn't diminish at all the incredible work that you've done. I am curious about if you've embedded any sort of case study information that sort of speaks to the political challenges, given that, that's sort of part of what we have to think about when we choose, what policy to go after, that for success is, understanding the nuances of the political challenges. Are there case studies from specific jurisdictions that have succeeded that speak to how to address those challenges at all?
We really haven't done that yet. Again, that's one of the things we have thought about, beefing up the site in the months and years to come if we were to get more volunteer staffing to do that. But right now we don't have that built into the site.
I'll add, here and there, you might find something. Just when you said that off the top of my head, I thought, oh, I think Oregon's electric utility reform proceeding had something like that, where they published a set of case studies that walked through how they got the Senate bill through and what kind of pressures they faced. But it would have to come from the jurisdiction. So if folks are out there writing about the legislative process and the challenges they had, we're happy to promote that, especially alongside a successful piece of legislation. But it's very catch as catch can.
Yeah, I could imagine that would be the case, and so I was just curious if that was something you had time to do, and I can see that that might be something that you pursue later, but would be valuable to us to be able to really craft a strategy for success. But thank you. This is again very awesome.
I'm sorry, Karen. One option that you have is use the St. Louis example. I'm quite sure that there are stories in the St. Louis media about that particular ordinance and the process that it went through. And on any particular law that's been adopted from any particular jurisdiction, you may be able to find media stories, web, newspaper stories, whatever, about that, or contacts that you could talk to.
Yeah.
And so to some degree, you could build that. Jordan was right. There are some reports that we have that that provide case studies. And the other thing that I would just suggest, though, is that any particular law that you see that has been enacted in a particular jurisdiction almost surely comes with a story that you can figure out by digging around a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's an onus on us to do that research. So thank you for that point.
Thanks, Karen.
This is Matt. I wanted to jump in here, and so as you can tell, we have a great aggressive group of Climate Reality Project squad of leaders who have a lot of experience in this. So we're going to give you feedback on this in terms of the use of the tool in bringing petitions to local governing bodies. So that's a super important thread of work in a feedback loop. What else can we do to help you with the tools? You guys were saying, I think it was you, Mike, talking about this. You're trying to get more law schools and lawyers. I mean, the network of people. We have 1,000 people here, and there's a good chunk of them that no lawyers or no whatever. How, if at all, can our volunteers encourage help in other ways?
For one thing, spread the word around outside your area. We know that the Climate Reality Project is all over the country, and letting the other branches of the Climate Reality Project know about this would be very helpful. If there are successes in various jurisdictions, let us know. We'd love to to put that on the website. If we learned about that when some of these are enacted, even if in revised form, we'd love to know about that. If you have information on how any of these laws once enacted are actually working, are they actually achieving the greenhouse gas emissions that they promised, that would also be very useful, so that down the road, activists who are thinking about putting forward some of these kinds of bills will have the benefit of this experience would all be terrific. We're also putting out we just started it, a monthly bulletin with the new additions to the website. I'll put on the chat how you can subscribe to that. I have put on the chat how you can download a free copy of the PDF volume, the summary volume.
Great. Wei Tai, any more questions?
Deborah, our chapter co-chair.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I had a question. We've just come from another meeting about exactly this in the Marin and Sonoma area. And up in Sonoma, there were some REACH codes that triggered lawsuits. Is there a way for annotation to any of these codes of, yes, this is a model code that was enacted, however, it opened a can of worms or it got challenged by developers or whatever? Because I think if we're looking for codes that we can kind of push across multiple cities and counties, trying to find something that won't create further ramifications, but still is a good stretch would be great.
What happens at the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia has a separate website which accumulates all of the climate change litigation in the world, but it's not organized by the particular model laws. Jordan, I guess to the extent that there has been litigation about one of these laws, it might show up in one of the resources that you post.
Yeah, where we know we're not trying to track every time that there is a lawsuit, but anytime the lawsuit actually affects the implementation of the law, we try to update it and tell you how and why and where. So there was one coal ban that got overturned in California because there was an agreement with the developer and the county beforehand. We notate that, and you can see that it probably doesn't have to do with the explicit language that they used in the ban. Another place, Massachusetts, just had one of their natural gas bans overturned because it conflicted with state law. We note that with the resource, but we're not trying at a higher level to note every time there's a lawsuit related to the law. I have a feeling that might be another full-time job.
Deborah, if I can just add one sort of broader part to what Michael and Jordan said. The book itself, the big book, deals with this issue in quite some detail. on a great many issues. On phasing out fossil fuels, for example, there's been litigation about that. On any number of local product preferences that are built into many climate laws, there have been trade law challenges to those. And over and over and over again in the book, our authors flag the litigation issues that arise and have arisen in the context of particular laws. And so one way to go a little deeper on this perhaps is to have the book sitting somewhere, or a PDF of the book sitting somewhere, so that you can look at that and see what information might be available. The one other thing that I would suggest on this is, if you're, I will go back and use the St. Louis example again, is if you find somebody on the ground in St. Louis, you could simply ask, have there been litigation challenges that we might not have heard about? And just doing a little bit of that inquiry might be another approach as well.
Thank you.
Great. We have only a few minutes left. Is there any last question there, Wei-Tai?
I think Paul Wormer has had his hand up for a while from San Francisco. Go ahead, Paul.
A question, this may be a future improvement activity. There are various approaches to getting some codes through. So for example, in the San Francisco a new construction ordinance moving towards all electric, that's being run under health and safety codes because of the impact of natural gas on health and the environment and climate change, as opposed to under building energy codes or other authorizing entities. Do you have any guidelines, or potentially for the future, different approaches by states on what to target? And is my question completely unclear to you?
No, I think I get it. It's just that there's so much variation from city to city, county to county, state to state. And so we wanted to set forth all the examples we could find so that the people in the given locality can customize it. This is, somebody needs to take each of these the last mile. It has to customize it to the particular location.
But again, for those of us who are not lawyers, having some sort of a cheat sheet, perhaps by state, to say these are the overriding state regulations. And so different ways an approach has been taken within a state might give guidance to people on what to look at. So it's more a cheat sheet of ways of thinking about that, rather than going to a legislator who says, oh, well, the energy code won't let you do that.
Yeah, no, Paul, this is Matt. Paul, that's a good point. And maybe, with getting these law students at the various law schools connected to our work here, they can pay some attention to that. So that's a good thing for us to put in the parking lot of activity to work on. We have a couple of minutes left. I want to just throw it, for final comments, Jordan, John, Mike. You've got some go-getter activists here in California, up the West Coast and down the West Coast. Any final comments that you want to share?
Well, it's very encouraging to hear the enthusiasm that all of you have. And please share with us your successes. Also share with us your non-successes, but we'd love to hear how it's going. And if you have specific questions that we can help you with, please let us know.
Yeah, it's
John, anything? Jordan, go ahead.
Well, the thing that I would add is, Matt, is something that you and I have talked about, is if you feel like this conversation was productive, by all means, share it with others inside the Climate Reality Project. This has been recorded, and so I guess you could just share the recording, or I expect that Mike and Matt and Jordan and I might be, in Wei-Tai and anybody else might be willing to participate in one or more others of these. And if you think it's helpful, let other people know. That's really what this is about. And in terms of managing the complexity of this, I think there are a couple of basic take-home messages. One is there are lots of different kinds of tools They can be applied in a variety of different jurisdictions. And you know, if you all think that you run across people who say, well, look, what I really want is an ordinance on X thing, and I'm not seeing this in your website, let us know that. And if there's good enough reason to help you find legal resources to draft something, I think we would be willing to make a good faith effort to find legal resources to help you get something drafted.
That's great. Jordan, anything? Last comments?
No, just that it's been inspiring hearing from you guys who are working on the ground, and please keep us in the loop any way we can be helpful.
Great. Mike, John, Jordan, thanks so much. Wei Tai, thanks for your partnership and putting this on, and to all of our Climate Reality Project volunteers, thanks for being on the calls, and go get them.
This
Thank
is
you.
really awesome. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
That
you.
was great. Really appreciate
Thank you
it.
so very, very much. Hugely
Thank you.
helpful. Great
Yes,
resource.
indeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much. It's an incredible resource.
Bye.
All
So
right, good
much
night.
information you've made kind of digestible and accessible.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.